on June 22nd is what we would propose. So that's where we are. Tonight we will talk about the budget, and then we'll ask you to adopt the budget, the city budget, in one vote, and we'll ask you to adjourn into an RDA meeting to adopt the tentative budget for the redevelopment agency as a separate action. In the staff report, I made some notes, and I'll just highlight some of those. I wanted to go over some changes that we've made to the proposed tentative budget since we have last talked about it. And there are a few of those. So first of all, we increased the total budget for Class C road maintenance. We moved that from 500,000 up to 800,000, with the expectation that some of the revenue, which exceeds the budget in the current year, would be expended in the next fiscal year. Next one. In the budget we talked about before, we didn't really talk about transferring money from the general fund into the capital projects fund. And we made that change in the proposed tentative budget that's before you tonight, so that there's a transfer. We had the $500,000 budgeted in the general fund, but now we're saying, let's transfer that 500,000 to the capital improvement fund to be used on the public safety building. In addition to that, in our last council meeting, we talked about the possibility, or the interest, I guess, in maintaining our property tax rate. If the council chooses to do that, we're estimating that it would generate an additional $162,000. And so we're proposing that that additional revenue also be transferred into the capital improvement fund to go toward the public safety building or other capital projects.
Yeah, but can I just clarify one thing? I believe that is the full amount including growth, isn't it?
Yes.
So the 162,000 is not directly tied to whether we want to maintain the rate or not.
That's correct.
About 46,000, I believe, of that is going to occur simply out of growth in the city. Is my recollection half correct?
You're right. So we estimated that 46,000 would be from new growth, 116,000 would be from the decision to maintain the rate. And we estimate that would have an average impact of $17.15 per year on the average property owner. It's going to vary significantly depending on the value of individual properties, but we sort of have to talk in averages. So
what was that number, Evan?
So we're
16.
We're estimating 116,664 would be generated from the decision to maintain the rate. And we're translating that would be an average impact on property owners of $17.15 per year.
Thank you.
So these numbers are estimates based on historical trends. We're going to receive some accurate numbers from the county at the beginning of June. And so we'll have this conversation again, and we'll give you, numbers that are reliable based on the county's calculations. We just don't have those yet, so we're just estimating based on the past. So that's that. Last meeting, we talked about the Loman View Park Playground. There was originally $120,000 in the budget to replace that playground. And that has been removed from the tentative budget. But I understand that there are some more discussions that the council would like to have related to that particular budget item. So we'll ask for your direction on that. And we don't have to make that decision tonight. The tentative budget can be adopted as it is, or you can modify it. But we have opportunity to make changes before the final budget is adopted. We also have the Vector truck and the stormwater fund. We had the wrong number in there. And so the actual number that we're proposing now is $410,000. And that would pay for the Vector truck that's being proposed in stormwater fund.
What was the previous number, Evan?
It's like 286 or something.
It was 2/3 or 4/10.
Yeah. There was only 2/3 that we had in there. And what was happening is we were gonna split the cost between the water department and the stormwater, saying that stormwater would use it about 2/3 of the time, with the water using it some portion. But then after talking about it, we really thought that the stormwater is the one that's gonna be mainly using that. And so we put it all into stormwater.
So the whole 410 was in the budget somewhere before, it's just now being assigned to one department?
No, it was in the conversations, it was there, but in the budget presented to the council, it was only 2/3 there.
So he wants tires on it and stuff.
You want the whole truck.
Okay.
Things they ask for now.
Well, it's pretty demanding.
Another change in our discussion with the council last time, your communication to us was no fee increase in the solid waste fund, so we made that change, and the tentative budget reflects that, which shows an operational loss in that fund of 15,721, which the council felt like our fund balance would be able to cover that without a problem. So those are the changes since our last discussions. I wanted to just cover these impacts on residents that the mayor had requested. This budget contains some proposed credit card service charges that would be applied to some of the fees of the city. Building fees, parks and recreation fees, court fees. Although talking with the Parks Department, they would prefer simply increasing fees rather than tacking on an additional fee that would be tracked separately. So that's something that we can work out when we adopt the revised fee schedule. Also, the Central Weaver Sewer District is increasing their fees to the city. And so we talked about this last time, but $87,000, $88,000 is the increase to the city, and that increase is proposed to be passed on to ratepayers in the amount of $1.10 per month on the sewer fee. The other impact we already talked about, which is the property tax impact, depending on how the council decides to move forward with the property tax rate. So, and then I wanted to just highlight a little bit on the health insurance. We talked about health insurance for employees last time, or maybe it was 2 meetings ago. But so in the budget right now, we're proposing, or we have proposed the more restricted network that was proposed, which would save the city and employees about 4.5%, but also providing the option where employees can pay an additional amount to have the broader network for their individual plan. So that's built into the budget. We don't have a finalized plan yet. I know that they're working toward that, getting ready for open enrollment. And so that's just the way that it is in the budget. Also, for those employees that are on the high deductible plan, the premium fees are being reduced, but the contribution to the health savings account is being reduced as well. So that's part of the cost savings in the budget. And that reduction in the health savings account contribution is a result of the savings that the city is realizing on this new health insurance plan. The savings is greater on the regular health plans and not as great on high deductible plans. And so in an effort to try to keep those plans close to being on par, that's why those reductions are being proposed. And then the other thing with health insurance, we don't know exactly which plans employees will be choosing. And so our open enrollment is coming up, and after that open enrollment, we'll have a more clear idea of exactly what the costs should come out to. So those are the main things I wanted to highlight on the city budget. I included some things from past staff reports in this report, but we've really covered most of that. So if the council has any questions, oh, sorry, one other thing I did want to mention though is the sales tax. I sent an email to the council this week about sales tax. We received a report from the Utah League of Cities and Towns. And they have a consultant that is projecting, I guess he did a study of 63 cities in Utah, not including North Ogden City. But on average, those 63 cities, he's projecting the sales tax will be 3.5% greater in fiscal year 2022 than what's expected in fiscal year 2021. In our budget, we were much more conservative than that. We recognized that fiscal year 2021 would be significantly higher than past years. And we expected that fiscal year 22 would actually see a decrease in sales tax revenues. So we programmed a 5.5% decrease in fiscal year 22 compared to 21, whereas their study is saying a 3.5% increase. So we wanted to bring that to your attention and get your input. If you feel like we should adjust our sales tax estimate, we certainly can do that. But would like your input on how that should go.
Yeah, but could you give the council a little bit more information on that? There were some cities, large cities, who had a lot of restaurants and hotels and things of that nature, who will see substantial increases because of the opening of the economy. I'm just wondering what the composition of their study was, because I do believe that those who were pretty well shut down are going to see significant increases. But I want to make sure that we don't assume we're going to see it based upon our balance.
Well, I have the list right here from the study, so I'll just give you some sample cities with their projected increases. Would that be helpful?
Just a couple, just so the council can get a feel.
So looks like the largest increase is Harriman City, 10.1% projected increase. Woods Cross, 6.3%. South Salt Lake, 2.9%. There were a couple of cities that he projected to have decreases. North Salt Lake and Roosevelt City are projected to have decreases, where all the other cities are projected to increase. Farmington City projecting to increase 1.7%. So
Okay, thank
kind
you.
of all over the board, I guess.
Does that include growth in Harriman? It's growing very rapidly. So, or is that just apples to apples, or does that include growth?
I think growth is probably factored into this. Do you think so?
Yeah. As Evan and I talked about this, if you look at the 63 cities, you can try and pick the city that's closest to North Ogden and still find a zillion reasons why it's not the same. You know, Vernal might have similar sales tax dollars, but it's like a county hub, and like there's all these things that's just make it different. And so it's a lot of a guessing game. And I think as we talked about it, the recommendation would be, if the council wants to move, we would not recommend probably going all the way to the 3.5% increase, but look at something in between would be a staff recommendation.
Go ahead, Evan.
So, that's something we'd like some feedback on. But again, you know, tonight we're asking you to adopt a tentative budget. You're free to change the numbers in the packet however you'd like, if you'd like, or if you'd rather adopt the budget as it is and continue these discussions leading up to the adoption of the final budget, that's okay too. So I guess this would be a good chance for you to talk about whatever things you think are important, and at the point you're ready to adopt the tentative budget, there's an ordinance provided in the council packet that you can make that motion.
Okay, so the first thing I'd like is maybe some feedback on things to change, particularly the sales tax if we have interest. Next, Councilman Swanson, this is kind of your assignment. Let's start with you.
Thank you. What struck me with the cities that you mentioned, Evan, and it's helpful that you mentioned those, is that the cities that you mentioned that are highest seem to be the ones that have the greatest growth. And that makes sense. You mentioned Woods Cross. What was after Woods Cross? There was it Bountiful? No, it wasn't Bountiful.
South Salt Lake.
South Salt Lake,
What was that?
Harriman, North Salt Lake, and South Salt Lake.
No,
Roosevelt.
what's that?
Roosevelt.
Wasn't Roosevelt.
I got crashed down there with.
It was Farmington. Yes, thank you, Farmington. I'm thinking of the retail that Farmington has that we don't. And they're projecting Farmington at, what was it, 1.5, 1.3?
1.7.
1.7. So I think we would be foolish to think that we are somehow going to see a sales tax bump equal to or higher than Farmington would, because we simply don't have that kind of a retail base in our city. I feel comfortable if we were to consider keeping our, that we would look at a flat rate, a flat, neither a decrease nor an increase. It's such a strange time. Last year, what we projected and where we ended up. If you had told me that we would be 16% above our greatly decreased budgeted projections, I would have told you were nuts. If you had told me that we'd be 16% over prior year, I would have thought you're really nuts. But that's where we ended up. So my crystal ball works as well as it has in the past, which is non-functional. And I look into it and it says, "Are you kidding me?" So my suggestion would be that we stay at a flat. I don't think we need the 5.5% decrease. I don't think that's realistic. 3.5% increase, that's not even close to realistic for us, I don't believe. And then what? We'll end up with 7 or 8% growth and it'll be something weird. But I think a starting point to discuss is to keep it flat.
You know, one thing to consider, a little bit of inside information I have is we're up 16% now, and who knows, but this is when the pandemic really started and everybody was revving up, storing things. So we'll get our March sales tax when sometime this month,
May.
into this month. So I'm wondering if, when we compare, if that 16% will really stay in there. I was thinking maybe we split that and we take, you know, you got the 3.5 and the 5.5, so we're at 9. So I wonder if we just had a small decrease. You can always add in. The problem is once you add it in, right, we have to have a use for that, whether it's capital projects or whatever. But I think Councilman Swanson's right. It's the crystal ball.
I think for tonight's purposes, I think we're okay adopting the tentative budget. I know we're going to be safe.
Yeah, you can always add.
And we have between now and the final budget to get comfortable with we know that 5.5 is going to be, we're not going to stay there, but where do we go from there? I think tonight is too short a time for us to really kind of sit down and go through this in our own minds and then discuss. I know Cheryl wants us to stay till at least midnight talking about sales tax projections and economic forecasts, right, Cheryl?
That's right.
She told me earlier today, I'd like to stay till midnight till.
That would result in, if we went to just to break even, we're a little over 3 million in sales tax, 3.2. Is that what?
Yeah, it's about 200,000 or so increase.
So I was thinking 5% of that. Yeah, would be a substantial amount of money.
Yeah, so if we project equal revenues fiscal year 21 and 22, it would increase our sales tax estimate by 201,000.
And that's if we keep flat. And so if we, Mayor, as you, a slight decrease, say we kept it to a 1.5% increase, we'd still have additional monies that we would be showing in the budget, but just not as much.
Right.
I think the question is for council, where are you comfortable for us being? And I don't think the question has to be answered tonight.
Correct.
I think, for me, we adopt the tentative budget and then we have a discussion at our next council meeting about where are we feeling on this tax increase, on these sales taxes.
I think one thing I want to clarify, did you indicate that this tentative budget includes a tax increase, a property tax increase?
It does.
No,
The maintain of the rate. Yeah.
it's a maintaining of the rate, which results in higher taxes being paid.
I'm just a substance over form guy. I figure the substance is that
We're
People
not
would pay.
increasing the rate.
I know,
If
but
we
we're,
don't increase the rate, that doesn't require a truth in taxation.
It does.
It does, if we
It
just
does,
keep it the
because-
same.
It
Okay.
the
does.
same as it is this year
Yes.
or the same dollars?
The same as this, the rate is the same as
Yes,
this
it
year.
requires a truth in
requires a truth in
taxation. I would just throw out for the council's consideration based upon the sales tax situation. And the way the budget's coming in, do we really need to do that this year?
It's a question that we have.
I mean, that's a big question. The others, I think we can pass on, but I would like to find out what the council's thought is on that. Councilman Barker,
Yes,
you want to have a property tax increase?
not a tax increase, maintaining the rate. It comes down to, do we want to maintain the same rate and we count on inflation? Or do we want to have a bump some year? And it'll be a big rate increase. It's easier to maintain the rate and have a slight increase than to have a big jump.
Councilmember Stoker, you've given that some thought. What are your thoughts?
I agree with Brian. It's easier to maintain.
Okay, Councilman
What would be
Swanton.
last?
Can I add or state one more thing?
Yeah.
I pulled up, the taxes from last year, we're sitting here. 50% of our taxes go to Weaver School District. 10% go to North Ogden City. So by maintaining our rate, we'll go from 10% to almost 11%. 11% of your taxes will come to North Ogden City.
That assumes nobody else raises
Yeah.
theirs, which I know the central Weaver Sewer
So-
District's gonna raise theirs.
So then what we're saying is if we're not gonna maintain our rate, now 9% or 8% is gonna come to the city.
A wise person once told me you can't spend percents. Right, Councilmember Ekstrom?
Exactly.
All right, Councilman Severing, what direction do you want to give?
So what exactly would be, if we maintain the rate, because I'd like to see it in dollars. So what would, if we maintain the rate, what would it be per household, per month to maintain the rate? And I've always been a fan of,
$17.
oh, that was back to the $17.
Per year.
Okay.
$1.50 a month.
So it's $1.50 a month. I prefer the maintain the rate. So thank you for clarifying that.
All right,
Oh, yeah. I'd probably up the rate, but I'm kind of a spendthrift. But I think I've made it pretty clear in our communication that I really feel like public safety needs to be completely funded by property taxes. I think it stays right here. It's a complete correlation. So, so that nobody has a big fit about it, I think we at least maintain the rate and then steadily look at trying to increase the dollar amount that we receive from property taxes so that it's more matched. That's just a philosophy that I have. So, I mean, so at least this time it's a strategy. Thank you. Yeah.
Councilman Swanson, or you requested your last.
Well, I've been outvoted, no.
You don't have to go back.
No, I think one caveat to the discussion that we're having, and I agree with Councilman Barker, I think if North Ogden had adopted this policy many, many years ago, we would not be in the situation that we are now. The caveat being that in those times, because they will come again, that housing values drop. We would have to be willing, hopefully the council at that time, and hopefully it doesn't happen while I'm still here. But if it does, we need to be willing as a council to allow that property rate to stay the same, knowing that a decrease in home values would mean that we would be seeing a decrease in revenue. And we'd have to find the cuts to offset that. I think it would be unfair to our residents to say we're going to maintain now while home values are going up, but we're not going to maintain, we're going to raise your rates when home values go down. So I agree with the policy, but I think it needs to be a hold fast kind of policy that that's what we live with. That's my feeling. I am for maintaining the rate.
Councilman Barker, did you have something to add?
Yeah, couple weeks, months ago, we made a decision that all of our property taxes are going for public safety. So if we maintain our rate, that just means that's less we have to bond possibly for the police station. Whether we possibly we won't have to do a tax increase next year to maintain our rate.
That would be a tax increase next year, maintaining a rate, because the values would probably go up.
There's talk every year in the legislature that there wouldn't be a tax increase. We'll just hold out hope.
Yeah, I think the philosophy is one that has to be discussed. I just wanted to point out that based upon our budget this year, we don't need it this year. But decision is reached and we'll support that. Got that direction there, Devin?
I do, thank you.
Okay, anything else you need from us?
Are there any other questions about the proposed budget before somebody makes a motion?
I was just curious of one thing.
Go ahead.
So Dave, and you know, I'm incredibly supportive of whatever decision you guys make on this, and we never want to cut back citizen, service to the citizens, but I had us down for $235,000 for a Vector truck, and it's a 410. Is that just a?
So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I did.
There's a split between the water department and the stormwater department.
Okay,
And then we put all into the stormwater department. It did transfer all that money.
gotcha. Thank you.
Before they had a truck with no tires on it,
And no,
because it's only 235,000.
Backer truck with no hose.
All right, we do have on the agenda, I think, public comments.
Yeah.
Hear from the public in regards to this, anyone that's here, or
And this is the tentative budget.
this is the tentative budget. Before we seek a motion, though, we're asking for public comments, correct? Okay, so now would be the time for anyone here who would like to make a comment about the tentative budget, or anyone online that would like to make a comment about the tentative budget.
Mayor Susan Kilgore would like to make a comment.
All right, Susan Kilborn, go ahead.
First of all, I want to apologize because I said the word DAMN on the first public comments, and I apologize for that, but I was pretty steamed. I have some questions. I think our budget is one big disaster. We are trying to make a silk's purse on something on a pig's ear amount of money. We are hurting. I see several things on here that I have a question about. First of all, why do we need 4 new police vehicles? I would like to know, have we worn them out? Is there something obsolete about them? you know, I am 100% behind our police force and always have been. I've donated to them my own personal money. Second of all, I see a request for a part-time accountant. I didn't know we had a full-time accountant. And would it be more economically feasible if we have a full-time accountant to build overtime pay in to that individual's pay for when it is needed? And third, I have a question about the public safety building, and I see funds being moved back into the general fund away from being designated to the public safety building, and that concerns me. I have a great passion for getting the darn thing built. We've been trying to do this since 2017, and Blake, you know, and I know Mr. Mayor, you know, and I'm sure all the city council realizes that building costs are going up and up and up. And we keep shelving this because it's like the sore nobody wants to pick at. And I'm 100% behind Charlotte when she says, you know, we need to raise property tax. We are all benefiting with our property going sky high, especially those of us who are selling our property. If we really want what we want for our city, we have to be willing to at least make some concessions. And I'd rather see a stepped procedure to raise property tax to get the things we want for our city, rather than have one dumped on us when we get some big shock in the economy. And once again, I apologize. I said I wasn't going to say anything more, but you know, sometimes it's pretty hard to put a lid on this woman, as you guys all know. It's only because I care. Thank you for your time.
So maybe I could just comment. I don't think we're moving away from the public safety building and transferring funds out of the capital projects fund to the general fund. It's actually a transfer otherwise to cover the bond cost. That is why we targeted to have a $500,000 excess in the budgeting process this year. So we would have funds to pay for the public safety building bond as it moves forward without having to have a gigantic increase in property taxes. So there might be some confusion there. I don't think we're moving away from that. We surely don't have a cost yet, but things are moving forward. Chief, I don't know if you'd like to mention why we need 4 police vehicles, to clarify that for Ms. Kilborn.
Sure. So we have 27 vehicles in our fleet, and they're on a 7-year rotation. So each vehicle, after 7 years of life, is replaced, and that's due to wear and tear. Obviously, police vehicles get worn and torn. So typically, I think our average mileage is between 70 and 80,000 miles at the point that we turn them over. And that also, you know, before they get too worn out, the resale value is also up there, where we're actually getting some money back from our purchase.
Thank you, Chief. Katie, do we have any other comments this evening?
Not at this time.
All right. Seeing no other public comments, I'd be seeking a discussion or action to consider an ordinance approving the tentative budget. That ordinance would be number 21-12, I believe.
This one's 11.
20-21-11. Thank you. Do we have someone that would like, John, do you have something you'd like to say?
No, I'm sorry, I misheard. Sorry, you said it right. I'm already forward a year. I'm 2022. You said it right, Mayor. I apologize.
Yeah, but we're approving the tentative fiscal year 2022 budget, but the ordinance is 20-21-11. It'd be most likely I'd mess up instead of you, John, so don't feel embarrassed on that one. So do we have, huh?
He's sleep deprived.
You got that? So do we have a motion to accept the proposed tentative budget by adopting that ordinance number?
Mayor, I move that we adopt ordinance number 2021-11, the tentative budget for fiscal year 2022.
I second that.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, this being an ordinance, we'll take a roll call vote. Councilman Severing,
Yes.
Councilman Barker,
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker,
Yes.
Councilman Swanson,
Yes.
and Councilmember Ekstrom.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. Now be looking for a motion to recess the city council meeting and convene the RDA committee. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Councilmember Stoker. Do we have a second?
I second it.
Second by Councilmember Severing. Any discussion? All in favor of convening the RDA meeting and recessing the city council? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're now in the RDA committee. Evan?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just for the benefit of the public, the redevelopment agency was established by the city council in an effort to create redevelopment and improve, I guess, to invest in certain areas of the city. We have two separate redevelopment areas. One we call the RDA, the other we call the CDA. And so we have two separate funds for those two separate areas in the city. And we have budgets that are proposed each year for both of those areas. The CDA budget, the CDA area is newer than the RDA. The CDA has just recently started to generate some revenue, and the CDA prior to this borrowed money from the RDA fund that is going to be paid back when it generates sufficient funds. So the budget in the CDA fund is, I'm looking at page 31 of the tentative budget. So we're looking at $100,000 of projected property tax revenue in the CDA. And then all of that is proposed to just go to project reserve and not be expended, other than we'll make a payment to the RDA fund to reduce that debt. So that one's pretty simple. The RDA fund has a few other things that we'll go over. We're projecting $730,000 in property tax revenue in that fund. We're proposing $35,000 in offsite improvements. That's primarily for the beautification efforts along Washington Boulevard, including the flower pots. And next item on the list is project reserve, $440,000. That's just going into the fund balance. The next item is $60,000 for the retaining wall behind Lee's. That's an item that we've budgeted for several years and have had a difficult time getting contractors to bid on the project. It sounds like progress has been made recently, and we actually have some bids. So whether that project happens in the current year or the next year, we have a budget there in both years so that it can happen once I guess the project is finalized and agreed upon with those that have bid. Next item is $11,000 transferred to the general fund. And this is for the wages of the flower waters for the hanging baskets on Washington Boulevard. And then the last item is $188,000 transferred to the Aquatic Center, which is the change we've talked about where the RDA fund will subsidize the Aquatic Center rather than the general fund subsidizing the Aquatic Center. So those are the proposed budgets for those two funds that are governed by the redevelopment agency board.
Did I see in there the principal payment, or did we approve that to pay off the entire bond last year?
Yeah, we had your approval in the amended budget in the current year to pay off the entire bond. And we're hoping to be able to get that completed before the end of this current fiscal year. Any other questions on these proposed budgets?
Swanson.
Mayor, I know that in a couple of meetings that we've had discussion as we transferred the subsidy of the Aquatic Center from the general fund to the RDA fund, that we had discussions on reducing the amount of subsidy necessary by increasing revenues. I know I've spoken with Tiffany, and Tiffany, do you have something that you'd like to present?
I do have information for you on increased fees.
Okay, are you going to do that in your later presentation?
I know, that
You can do that now.
specific to parks, but I do have information for you on fees.
Council, if it's okay, I'd ask Tiffany if she could give us an idea of what she's thinking along those lines. Thank you, Tiffany.
Absolutely. So taking a look at the Aquatic Center fees, which I will mention just a little bit later, but admission at the Aquatic Center is currently $6 for North Ogden residents, $6.50 for residents outside of North Ogden. And we had approximately 30,260 individual daily visits over the season last year. An increase of 50 cents to each of those daily admission totals would result in about $15,000 increased revenue, or approximately 2,500 more daily admission visits total. Information as to that. Last year was a little bit of a unique year. We don't know that we garnered the same attendance that we had last year, just because we were one of the only facilities open and one of the only things that people were able to do. We also had really good weather that worked in our favor. It was a very hot year last year. A little bit of additional information. As we do annually, we looked at some other facilities around us, and North Shore currently has the highest general admission of facilities in the area. Just for your information, we're at $6 and $6.50. Roy follows us at $5.50, and I have heard that they are looking to raise their fees to $6 to meet where ours are currently at. Brigham City is at $5, Farmington $5, and Layton $4.50. Season passes, Farmington actually charges $75 and $100 respectively for resident, non-resident for their passes. Ours sit at $70. The reason we don't charge a differential right now on our season passes is because we found that when we did charge a differential, there were not passes, at least not very many, only a handful purchased by residents outside of North Ogden. And we found that we were actually able to get rid of that differential and sell more passes that more than made up for that difference. Punch passes at the Aquatic Center currently sit at $50 and $55 with a differential for resident, non-resident. And swimming lessons sit at $40 and $55 resident, non-resident. Those are both also the highest of the areas we pulled. So if just looking at daily admissions, if the council is interested in a 50-cent increase, the last time we did increase those fees was 2019 and 2012 before that. But if admissions stays the same, if weather stays the same, it would be about a $15,000 increase.
So what you're saying is you can guarantee the weather and the admissions. Is that what I heard?
One of these days.
My hearing, you know how it is.
One of these days, I'll control the weather.
Tiffany, one of the things I believe we're faced with, that a lot of businesses are faced with, is increase in wages to get lifeguards. So we're seeing that kind of fight against our ability to make progress. We talked with any of the other cities to see what their intentions are. Don't want to get into price fixing or anything, but they've got to be facing the same issue we're facing, aren't they?
They have. Usually the Aquatic Center in this city has been kind of the leader in both increasing prices and increasing wages. So a lot of other facilities like Roy that I mentioned are adjusting their fees. to match ours, and it usually comes a couple years after we've made adjustments. So I think that would be typical. As far as hiring and needing employees, I think that's something that the city, the state is seeing across the board. And that's something we'll talk more a little bit too about when we get to parks.
Do you see any other services, an increase in swimming lessons, midnight swims, anything of that nature that could generate additional revenues?
I haven't seen an increase in swimming lessons come yet. As far as other facilities opening plans, we're still kind of on the rebound from adjusting to what COVID restrictions have been and are now not. So I haven't seen their plans for this current year yet.
Yeah, but I would just ask, it seems like the subsidy at 180,000 is much larger than we're used to. I know last year they had the one time where they caught up with reversing the prepaid fees. So it reduced it. This year it'll be kind of an offset. It just seems that jumped up pretty quick on us for any identifiable reason. Seems like we were 70, 80, 90,000.
Let me check. See what we were last year.
Seems like it was 135 or 140 before they made that reversing entry.
Fiscal year 20, 138,000. In the current year, our budget is 170,000. So there, it has been stepping up from year to year.
And I'm just wondering why that seems to be unusual. Seems like our attendance has been about the same.
That's a difficult one because until COVID, we actually didn't track attendance on a click-by-click basis. We track sales, but if somebody brings a season pass as far as attendance goes or other things like that, we haven't had staffing up front because of the cost of that until COVID to track attendance.
Evan, before we get to the final budget, can you help us dig down a little bit, drill down a little bit more detail
Sure.
on if we can try to identify the causes of the increases in that subsidy?
Sure. We can do that.
There's obviously reasons. I think we'd just like to know what those reasons are as best we can.
It jumped from 135,000 in the normal year to 180.
And then this
Yeah,
year.
last year was kind of an awkward year.
Yeah.
It seems in the normal year, we were about 135.
One thing to take note of, we didn't open until June. It's not a huge impact, but there's not a week there where we were closed. And then in the month of June, we did cancel all group reservations and reschedule as many of those as possible to this current year.
So last year, if I hear you correctly, is not really representative of what we should expect this year.
It's not.
The other problem we have with our budget is it slices her season in half.
Right.
So the numbers we're looking at are 2 half seasons combined into one fiscal year. So looking at it on a calendar year basis is really more useful for operations, but we have to base our numbers on a fiscal year, which, hits 2 different seasons.
So we have the July, August numbers are real because they happened last July and August. So we know what happened then. So our unknown is really this small portion of May and the month of June. Just seems a little strange that I'm not being critical, I'm just saying. I always like to know why it jumped up again.
We can analyze that and give
I
you
think
some
that would be
information.
wise, and I'd like to know if that reversal that the auditors made last year is, because that was a one-time catch-up, it's an offset going forward. So just to mention, make sure we all understand this, RDA money is commercial property taxes primarily, that's correct. So the 700,000 you mentioned as revenue this year, that's basically from commercial businesses who are in that zone, correct?
It is, and it's property tax revenue that other entities have foregone in favor of economic development.
Right, but now we're collecting it from commercial business. So, okay,
Mayor, I have one additional question,
Okay.
Tiffany. One additional question for you. We've talked about this in the past, and at the risk of being tarred, feathered, run out on a rail and other things. What about Sunday opening?
So I.
From a revenue perspective, as well as I know we have residents that would like to participate in the pool on a Sunday.
Yes, so I'm still of the same opinion as the last time we had a Sunday discussion. I don't feel like this area supports the demand for being open on Sunday. But one of my other large concerns about opening on a Sunday is the staffing to maintain being open on a Sunday. We do have some individuals who are not willing to be at work on a Sunday. And I also just have an extra day of trying to balance, I guess, not burning out of staff and the demand for that day. But we don't see frequent requests for us to be open on a Sunday. There are a few here and there, but I don't feel like it would be a revenue generator.
Are there any other facilities that are open on Sunday?
There are a few others.
Which ones are those? Do you know?
I believe Clearfield is open, and I need to double check on Roy.
I think
Hopefully
Roy
some of the
is.
others are.
You know, we went through this, all of the Macy's stores were closed on Sunday. And we did do it geographically based upon demand, but one of the things we did with the staff is we made the commitment, we wouldn't require anyone who didn't want to work on Sunday to work. And it was amazing the number of staff that were fine with it. And we were able to staff the stores, so things do change, demographics do change, and
Yeah,
just, I think it's a question. Just throw it out there.
Yeah, we can take a look at it. We have a staff of 12 just for the lifeguards that are on each of the shifts, and we have 2 to 3 shifts during the day. So it takes roughly 30 to 40 employees between the grounds crew, the cashiers, the lifeguards, and we employ a staff of about 60. So we would need to make sure that we could maintain that, but it's definitely something we can look into.
Any other questions, council? Regarding RDA, Evan?
One other comment I wanted to make is the Chalk It Up North Festival. The city has contributed $5,000 to that festival each year for the past several years. I don't remember how many. And we've paid for that out of this offsite improvements $35,000 budget. So that money is in the budget again, as it has been in the past. And if you have any direction about that, you can let us know.
Anyone comment on that question?
And I'm not having it anymore?
Oh, yes, I think they're planning to have it this year.
Yes.
They didn't have it last year because of the pandemic, but they're planning to have it, and they would like a contribution from the city if we're willing to do it. I believe in the past, the idea was that the RDA money would help to get an event going, help it to get established, and eventually the RDA funding would step away. But it's up to the RDA board to decide the timing of that.
Is there a plan for that? As the sponsors, the organizers, given us any plan? Have we asked for one?
I haven't seen a plan. Each year they ask if we can contribute again. But I don't know if anybody else knows anything. So, I mean, the RDA is going to be closing in a couple of years. So at some point, the answer will be no, just because of the RDA shutting down.
So, yeah, I don't see any comments from council on that, so, well, is that a hand raise? Councilmember Stoker?
I sat on that committee for several years also, and it was, the discussion was that there would be sooner or later, it was time to go away. So I think we should still follow that plan and give them decide what's a reasonable time frame, so they'll know that it's no longer going to be available to them, and they can start making future plans for that. So I would like to see it move in that direction.
Would you like to give them one more year?
At least one more year.
One more year.
Okay.
Over the next couple of years, we could do the 5,000 this year, 3,000 next year, 1,500 the year after that, and then 0, as the RDA shuts down, and that will incrementally move them towards that self-sufficiency. And if we come up with a schedule like that, they'll know well ahead of time, years ahead of time, what they can plan on for the next year.
Okay, with that, are there any other questions or discussion before we seek a motion? Yeah, I think we asked for those, didn't we? Public comments, you said there weren't any?
Read public comments on this section.
Okay. Sorry about that. All right, do we have any public comments on the RDA budget from anyone here or on Zoom?
Doesn't look like anyone on Zoom this time.
All right, seeing no public comments, I entertain a motion. We have a motion. This is by ordinance 20-21-12.
No.
RDA 2021.
Yes, it's ordinance number RDA 20-21-12. I'm looking at this right, is that correct? John,
Yes.
or do they have their separate? Would you prefer that we do this 22 or?
No, we do for the RDA ordinances, we do the RDA letters in it so it's easier to track.
So do we know that this is 20-21-12 with the RDA numbers then?
Yes.
Okay, so the RDA ordinance number 20-21-12.
Mayor, I'll move that we approve RDA ordinance 2021-12, approving the RDA fiscal year 2022 tentative budget as discussed.
We have a second on that motion.
Second.
We have several seconds. We go to Councilmember Stoker on that. Is there any further discussion? All right, we'll do a roll call vote on that. We'll start with you, Councilmember Ekstrom,
Yes.
Councilmember Swanson,
Yes.
Councilmember Barker,
Yes.
Councilmember Severin,
Yes.
Councilmember Stoker.
Yes,
Motion passes unanimously. And I'll now be looking for a motion to adjourn the RDA meeting and reconvene the city council meeting.
I move that we adjourn the RDA meeting and convene the city council.
Okay, we have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
We have a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of recessing the RDA and reconvening the city council meeting, say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. We'll now move on to item 10, I believe, on our agenda, which would be a presentation on the Parks and Recreation Planning and Maintenance. Tiffany Slater, our Parks and Recreation Director, will be making that presentation.
All right, good evening. Tonight I've got for you some information and facts about the Parks Department, about their maintenance, their areas of responsibility for the city. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that. Thank you in advance to Katie for helping me with the slides in advance. The Parks and Recreation Department is made up of 4 sub-departments. We have events, parks, recreation, and aquatics. Our mission is to provide the community with exceptional facilities and activities for health, learning, and play. Our vision is to create a nurturing environment for a lifetime of memories and neighborhood connection. So our parks team, this is department specific, just the Parks Department consists of 6 full-time employees and 14 seasonal employees. Currently, we sit at 3 full-time employees. We've just hired 2 full-time employees and we're still looking for 1 more full-time employee. And we sit at 2 seasonal employees. So we're hiring. If you know somebody, we are looking for people. We've hired twice for the assistant park supervisor position in the last 3 years. We've turned over 50% of our full-time parks employees in the last 3 months. And we're currently at less than 15% of our seasonal staff for the summer. We are constantly cycling through, by nature seasonal employees, but we've been cycling through employees that require training. And our parks training budget has been cut by thousands of dollars in the last 2 years. Our Parks Department maintains a fleet of equipment that includes hand mowers, riding mowers, weed eaters, tractors, gators, chemical sprayers, backpack sprayers, tillers, aerators, and feeders. Cool pictures of some of our equipment. I'm sure you've seen our team out on them. We do maintain parks. We also maintain buildings and facilities. We have 11 parks, multiple city buildings, smaller properties, and other facilities. So quickly, what I'd like to do is run through each of these parks and some of these other facilities. Some of them I think you'll be aware of, some of them you may not be aware of. So these are actually mostly in alphabetical order. I'm wondering how they got laid out. So we have Barker Park at 2275 on Fruitland. The developed portion is about 10 acres. The amphitheater at Barker Park. And then the undeveloped portion of Barker Park, just to the north, is about 30 acres. We have Bicentennial Park over by Lee's on 400 East.
Here goes the chief.
City Hall, we maintain outside and do the landscape here at City Hall. The community gardens over just on the corner of 550 and 2550. We have 39 garden boxes there and also a storage facility on that property. The dog park, this is actually an active detention basin maintained by Public Works, but is considered a park at almost 2 acres. East Entrance Park, some of you may know this as the corner of 1050 East and 3100 North, but it is technically a park sitting there at the corner. The Equestrian Park on Mountain Road. The Historical Museum just north of our Parks and Recreation building there on 2750. Lakeview Park, this is one some of you may not be familiar with. It is dedicated but undeveloped at 35 or 3350 and 350 East. There are trails that have been put in by an Eagle Scout project and some community volunteer projects that go through that park, but that's all that's been done to land. Loma View Park at 220 East Alberta, also about 10 acres. McGriff Park on 900 East, half of that at 5 acres. Mountain View Park on 3300 North, also about 5 acres. North Ogden Park on 500 East, this is our oldest city park and it's just over 10 acres. The Aquatic Center is considered a park and also maintained as one by our parks department. We have buildings and facilities, we have historical grandstands. The skate park, which has now been moved inside of North Ogden Park. Oaklawn Park, which is our largest development park at 14 acres. The Hammock Park inside of Oaklawn Park. Orton Green Acres Park there at just over 12 acres. The Parks and Recreation Building. Police Department Building. Senior Center Building. And Wadman Park, almost 10 acres. Some additional properties that we have that I don't have pictures of, a small property on the corner of 1050 East and 2600 North, and a small piece of property also on 300 East and Pleasant View Drive that we maintain. In all of these properties, we have some courts and fields that have specific turf and specific maintenance needs. 6 baseball and softball fields, a football field, tennis courts, basketball courts, sand volleyball courts, and multiple soccer fields. Just a couple pictures. That's the volleyball court, Oakland Park, the football field, the tennis court, and the basketball court in North Ogden Park. As far as mowing, our Parks Department orchestrates mowing, trimming, and care for over 60 acres of grass throughout the city, and that's inclusive of those pieces of property that we just talked about. As far as turf management goes, the Parks Department coordinates all the chemical and mechanical applications and the equipment needed that's for the turf management. That includes pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, aeration, the new shockwave aeration technology that we've been utilizing, and seeding. And our applicators, especially for pesticides, are commercially licensed. Those 60 acres are irrigated with a network of sprinkler systems that cover 30 different time blocks, 318 irrigation zones, and 3,600 sprinklers. And those have to be started up each year, repaired throughout the season, and winterized as we close things down. We have 9 playgrounds throughout our parks, and our park superintendent is a certified playground safety inspector. That is a certification held through the National Recreation Parks Association. The goal of our department is to always have 2 certified playground safety inspectors, one of which has been that assistant park supervisor position that we've rotated through. So we've gotten them trained and then they've left, and that's happened to us twice in the last 3 years. Yeah, that's it for that side. So quickly, I just wanted to brush through the playgrounds and their dates so we get a little information on those. Barker Park is one of our newest playgrounds, put in 2008. Lowman View Park has a playground from 1997. This is a very similar playground to McGriff Park on the next slide. Those two playgrounds, although different in color, are identical parts and pieces other than the ones we've had to take off and switch and move around. So McGriff Park is the one that's in this current budget year to be replaced. And Lowman View is the one that we requested in the upcoming fiscal year to be replaced. And we'll talk about their parts and pieces a little bit later. Mountain View Park's playground is from 1999. North Ogden has two playgrounds, an east and a west, both of which were replaced on our new playground rotation schedule, 2016 for the west and 2019 for the east. And Oakland's Park playground, as far as we can tell, was put in 2005. And Orton Park playground, which was put in 1995. Wadman Park playground is also one of our newer playgrounds put in 2008. So a little bit, we consider our parks and our playgrounds to kind of, they're a little bit living in that they are affected by their UV exposure, wind exposure, snow and ice, rain, just their general age from being outside, as well as by the people who use them for intended uses and non-intended uses. They're interacted with by graffiti and vandalism, unfortunately, as well as animals, rodents. You know, our parks are very living, changing, and pretty fluid. So all parks, our city and other cities require constant maintenance. I know we've had some questions raised as to conditions in city parks. And so I took a quick trip to some neighboring cities and was able to take some pictures of their parks. And these are things you will find at all parks. You know, missing bolts, drinking fountains that need replaced, roofing that needs replaced, sprinkler box lids. We do a lot of those every year. The underside to grills, they rust. And just playgrounds in themselves, they age, they get cracks, and they need repairs. So those are all pictures of things that I found in other city parks, but they're also things that you will find in our parks, and that's why we're constantly trying to repair and maintain them. Typical playground life expectancy for a commercial playground is 10 years. They can last longer than that, and have been seen to last up to 15, 20 years, but their life expectancy is about 10 years. So knowing that, our team started in 2016 with a playground rotation schedule. And we figured if we started rotating playgrounds every couple of years, we would get to a point where we were constantly rotating them so that they were new and they weren't aging to be 28, 29 years old and have the mechanical issues and the issues with parts and replacement that we're seeing on some of our playgrounds. So with that rotation, like I had mentioned, McGriff Park is the one that's up in this fiscal year. The identical playground to Lowman View Park, which we've asked for replacement in the next fiscal year, but this works well. And if our 9 playgrounds are rotated on the 2-year schedule, that will put them being replaced at 18 years, which we think with proper care and maintenance is a doable number, even with a 10-year life expectancy on the playground. I also put on here for your reference the playground warranty from Miracle Playgrounds, which is where we purchase. It's the brand of playground equipment that we purchase frequently. And none of their warranties extend past about 15 years, and that's only on certain parts and pieces. So we're hopeful that with this rotation schedule and for any future playgrounds to add it to the rotation schedule, that we'll be able to provide a consistent expectation for expenses for playgrounds, as well as better upkeep and rotation through those so that we don't have parts and pieces that we're unable to buy and replacements that we're not able to make just because of the age of the playground. So with taking care of our playgrounds, part of extending that life is playground inspections. And we have 2 different kinds of inspections. High frequency inspections are performed weekly by our park staff, and that's as they go out to mow, they look at the playgrounds. Their focus is on routine maintenance and structural integrity. And the pictures here, they're really small, but it's pictures of a high frequency inspection form and a low frequency inspection form. Low frequency inspections are performed and documented biannually by a certified playground safety inspector. And that's a very thorough and comprehensive review and evaluation of the playground equipment. And they provide recommendations on that. After those playground safety inspections are done, our team documents and puts in work orders for repairs. We do have an online work order system, and I've listed out for you kind of the priority and the repair standards that we have for those work orders as they get put in. So when we receive work orders of a safety or urgent nature, we try to respond immediately, take pictures of the equipment, take it out of use, and submit that work order request to get things taken care of. High priority, our goal is to repair within 7 working days. Moderate priority, 14 working days, and low priority work orders to repair within 28 working days of request. This works very well when we have a full team that is staffed. It's a lot more difficult when we are doing all the other tasks associated with the Parks Department and trying to continue to do this as well. We have 2 different repair categories. First, the small and minor repairs. This is equipment or hardware that's available to city staff, things that we can purchase nearby at local vendors, something like S-hooks, chain links for swings. A lot of this isn't the equipment that you will find on the actual playground itself. A lot of those are considered a major repair category because even things as small as a bolt are very specific to the playground, and we may have to order those from a vendor, or we may have to have a vendor come in to make those kinds of repairs, and we consider those to be major. Typical shipping on playground parts and equipment is 2 to 4 weeks, and over the last year or so, we've seen that extend up to 3 months and even longer to find parts and components specific to our playgrounds when they are of age that we can still find those replacement parts. We do have a couple of playgrounds, and McGriff and Lowmanview are 2 of those where they don't manufacture those parts that we need to make replacements anymore. So the reason we do these work orders, repairs, and inspections is for safety, and safety for North Ogden residents is the #1 purpose in taking care of that. So while our Parks Department has always inspected our playgrounds for safety, we're committed to improving and refining that process. Kind of a fun fact for you. If you're wondering about our parks or some of the things that you've seen so far in this presentation, you can go to northogdencity.com, and under the parks tab, there's a list of all of our parks and all of their amenities. So you can see whether there are playgrounds or swings or grills or those kinds of things there, and that's listed on the city website. So in addition, we talked about there's parks, there's buildings and facilities. But our Parks Department also keeps up with a couple more buildings and facilities on our parks, and that's our pavilions and our restrooms. So we have 9 different pavilions at the parks in North Ogden, and we also have 9 different restrooms. And as far as those go, you know, our Parks Department is responsible for building new facilities, for their maintenance, their daily cleaning, 7 days a week throughout the summer, sanitizing, stocking and supplying them, taking care of vandalism and making repairs, and their winterization in the fall time when it gets cold so that we don't have freeze breaks. And I'm proud to say that our Parks Department did a fantastic job winterizing. This is the first spring of startup that we've had where we haven't had any freeze breaks. And it was because of the extra care that they went and they took in keep taping the pipes that have been causing problems so that we don't have them running into things for the future. And as they build restrooms, we've also made taking care to consider the future of North Ogden. And we'll talk about development here in a little bit, but we've built these restrooms and facilities so that those buildings with proper care can last a long time. A building lifetime is a lot longer than a playground lifetime, and we hope that some of these restrooms will last us, 30, 40, 50 years to city build out, and they're sized appropriately to do that. Our Parks Department also maintains the city's trail systems, and this is an exhibit out of the city's master plan. It shows the trail systems, both existing and future for the city, as well as our park systems, existing and future. Our Parks Department takes care of trail development, trail maintenance and mowing, and weed control for the miles and miles of trails throughout the city. Tree care is another one of the responsibilities that they have. We're proud to be a Tree City USA city and have been for the last 13 years. They oversee Arbor Day. Our Park Superintendent is a certified arborist, and that's through the International Society of Arboriculture. And they take care of tree disease control and planting for Arbor Day, for maintaining our Tree City USA status. And then on the next slide, they also take care of tree cleanup. And this year, just as in years past, we have a lot of winds that come down through the city, and they're not always kind to the trees that we have. So when a tree falls or when there's damage done in some of our Parks Department is responsible to clean up and maintain all of that damage from those trees. We also take care of planting and gardening. North Ogden City is home to thousands of plants, shrubs, and flowers on public grounds. Their planting, maintenance, and treatment is done by the Parks Department. They also manage the care of hundreds of street flowers, pots throughout the city as part of the city's beautification program. The next slide you'll see here is the pots that our Parks Department has planted. in order to help reduce costs, and they take care of those until they are distributed to the cities and the planters that you see. And then the street flowers, they'll be hung in a couple of weeks. You'll see those there, and we water those twice daily. We also inspect them for pests. We check pH. It's a lot different than it is to just, we actually get calls probably about one a week that say, how do you maintain those flowers and keep them looking like they do? And there's a lot of care that's given to them. In addition to those things, our team is responsible for vandalism, repair, and reconstruction. They respond to vandalism and graffiti in our parks and on city properties. And just to give you an idea of what that entails, in April of this year, so just the last 30 days or so, the parks team responded to 13 separate instances of vandalism in our parks, ranging from minor, little toilet paper wads or what have you, to those that cost thousands of dollars in labor and material and equipment and time to repair. So we wanted to also give a thank you to the police department for helping us with that. They've been able to apprehend some of the individuals who have been causing some of the problems, and hopefully it lessens, but that's kind of the rate of vandalism we've been seeing this current year. A couple of pictures, some of the spray paint, a favorite, obviously. We had the toilet paper at North Ogden Park was lit on fire in our dispensers. Left ashes, ran smoke streaks up the wall. People had kicked down the walls of the grandstands and destroyed some of the things that are inside there as well. So if you want to see more, I've got lots. Our team is the manpower behind the city holiday lighting that you'll see at Bicentennial Park and also at City Hall. We have 75,000 singular light bulbs that get put on 1,500 strands that get put up on 25 different trees throughout the city. We're proud to say we've converted all of those to LED lighting for efficiency and energy savings. But knowing trees like we do, those lights also have to come down. So we take about a month and a half to put them up. And then it's a little bit faster on the going down side, but we do take them down after the month of December. A couple of pictures. The left one is here at City Hall and the right one is over at Bicentennial Park. As far as Cherry Days goes, the Parks Department plays an important role in the behind-the-scenes success for Cherry Days. That includes parade and park sound management, grounds prep, electrical festival considerations for those vendors who would like to have electricity in the grounds, facility setup for events and activities, day of execution, and fireworks facility coordination. Our team is also part of that awesome team that's recognized frequently for snow removal. We send our crews out to help with cul-de-sacs throughout the city. They are responsible for 5 of the 10 cul-de-sac routes, and it's about 197 cul-de-sacs that they clear after snowstorms here in North Ogden. After that, we also go back and we clear city sidewalks at parks and city buildings, and we help clear parking lots. Here's some of our trucks that we use during the summer. We put plows on those in the front, and use them in the winter for cul-de-sacs. And here's some of our sidewalks at our awesome parks. We get quite a bit of snow. Our parks team manages volunteer cleanup projects, and we have some awesome residents who pitch in and help out with our city. But they are often big projects, and there's a lot that they work on and a lot of coordinating that needs done with that as well. This is a fun project, one of my favorites, where we partnered with Comcast at North Ogden Park for some maintenance and cleanup. So with all of that, how do we make the most of what we have? And our answer to that is to employ the most competent and skilled individuals who are able to complete their job duties with excellence and care. But a big part of that is training, like I mentioned. So this comes down to something that I would like you to consider, because we would like some feedback, and that's level of service. One way to look at level of service is by comparing ourselves and what we do with standards in other areas. National Recreation and Park Association had standards at one point, but just like every city is different, every park is different. And they decided that a better way to look at this is by using some metrics or some benchmarks. So they polled cities throughout the nation, and they've come up with park metrics rather than standards. So for example, one of the traditional standards of the Rec and Park Association was that a city should have about an acre of parkland for every 100 residents. And we'll look into the calculations of those a little bit later. But these new park metrics, or benchmarks as they call them, are things that we can look at that are what a typical agency would have. And some of those we do fairly well at. The residents per park, their benchmark number is 2,277. In North Ogden, we have, at the 2019 census, we have about 20,000 residents, and that's about 1,871 per park. So our ratio there is better than that typical metric. As far as residents per playground, that's 3,607, and we have 9 playgrounds, which puts us at about 2,287 residents per playground. Some of the other metrics, and it's helpful to use all of them in conjunction with the others, because you can look at one metric and say, wow, the city's doing fantastic. And you can look at another metric and you can say, wow, we've got a lot of room for improvement. But I think it's helpful to look at those with each other to kind of get a better picture. So we looked at residents per park and we looked at playgrounds per resident. But one of those benchmarks is 9.8 acres of parkland for every 1,000 residents. North Ogden has about 4 acres for every 1,000 residents, which is 41% of benchmark. So that is our current level of service. And the Parks Department's question to the City Council is that a satisfactory level of service for acres of parkland for the residents that we have in this? Let's go to the next slide. As you all know, building and growth and development has exploded lately. Here's just a Google image of 2011. You can see the open space and the undeveloped land, and then 2020 and how much is developed. And if the city is, let's say the city is satisfied with the current level of service for parks. If the plan is for the city to double in size in the next 10 to 20 years, and we would like to maintain the current level of service, that means we need to add about another 80 acres of parkland. I said 60 acres was mowing, and there's about 20 more acres of additional landscape or hardscape surface in those parks, but that would mean adding an additional about 80 acres in the next 10 to 20 years. Is the city prepared to do that to maintain the current level of service? If the city would like to see an improved level of service closer to that benchmark that's there, what is the plan for funding that and for setting aside those properties so that they don't just develop? Part of that planning involves a Parks Master Plan. So in 2001, there was an approved Parks Master Plan that listed a bunch of capital projects. That was updated, or draft updated, I should say, in 2006 by Weber State University. Our team looked at that, and for the last couple of years, we've said this really needs updated. So last year, our team started to update that on our own. If you go to the next slide, we've started with a parks inventory, and we had one of the interns that worked here that helped us with that. But we've actually inventoried each of our parks so that we know what we have and where we have it. And I have a map like this for each of our separate parks. In addition, planning involves a capital plan, and this is just screenshots of our capital plan that we went and took a look at this past year. We removed projects that have been completed, and you'll notice, as others have, that there are not a large amount of dollar figures on here or future dates. And the reason is because we are requesting some city council direction. If we're going to expand, if we're going to put in at least another 60 to 80 acres in the near future, where is that going to go? What are the council's priorities as to what land develops or what land is purchased? We can head off, in any direction staff thinks we ought to go, but it's not helpful if it's not a project that's funded and backed by the city council. So I've met with Councilwoman Stoker, and we've gone over, what potential projects there are, but really we've developed a lot of things in the parks that we already have. Many of our parks are developed to what you call completion, where they just need that routine maintenance and care. They're not planned to have an additional playground in them or, additional structures. And some of the things that we've completed in the last 10 years that have been removed from that capital planning list are, we've added a Gaga ball pit at McGriff Park. That was done as a scout project in coordination and volunteer with our Parks Department. Basketball courts, the Hammocks Park. There's a new announcers booth at the Equestrian Park that was put in by our talented Public Works team. We replaced 3 restrooms at Horton, Oaklawn, and Loma View Parks. We've renovated and leveled both the football field and all 6 of our baseball fields, our softball fields. Replaced playgrounds according to that rotation schedule for both playgrounds in North Ogden Park and for McGriff Park. We've added a volleyball court and upgraded the sand, and we've improved the skate park as we relocated it. So like I mentioned, these projects and the maintenance and care, they do require funding. Revenue for the Parks Department comes, Parks and Recreation Department, for the entire department comes from Bowery reservations, sports registration, event tickets, sponsorships, Aquatic Center fees, impact fees, the general fund, and grants. And the city council has the responsibility and the purview to adjust those fees as needed to help cover current and future costs of the facilities to maintain the level of service that the council feels is appropriate for the city. Exploring other options. So the staff and city council did a thorough review of the possibility of outsourcing the park's mowing less than 10 years ago. That included an RFP and a bid process. And at that time, it was determined that it was in the best interest of our residents the care and maintenance of the park's facilities for mowing stayed in-house in order for us to maintain the level of service that we have today. As far as citizen involvement, we have the North Ogden Parks, Trails and Open Lands Committee, and we would love to see more involvement on that committee. They are lacking membership. They're struggling to find positions to fill seats that are there. And we've had to cancel a few meetings just for lack of agenda items from committee members. But staff feels like it would be a great idea, as they have in years past, for this committee to provide recommendations to the council for planning and timeline for future parks. So as always, we are here to help. I hope this is giving you a little bit of information on our parks, hopefully spurred some conversation and discussion that we would like to see have so that we can get a little bit more direction as to our parks, as to your expected level of service for parks, playgrounds, and other things. And if you have any questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tiffany. Any questions from council?
What was the acronym, NOTTAL?
North Ogden Parks, Trails, and Open Lands.
Any questions, council, for Tiffany while she's here? I think she has some questions she'd like to get some answers to.
Some of them, they may take a little bit, but we are looking for direction.
Priorities, I think, we've got Barker Park sitting out there that this kind of had a semi-commitment to. I'm not sure how firm it was, but it's been sitting there for about 20 years. How many acres do we have there undeveloped?
About 30 undeveloped.
Up above there. I think the last number I saw on that was about a $10 million bill, as I recall. I think this is part of the thing that we talk about often lately is what I call soft infrastructure. If we're going to build out, we surely need to have plans for that. I believe one of the problems we're facing a little bit, and Evans, he's back, is we do have a negative balance in impact fees in parks. I believe that we have we waive some of those impact fees, John, on future developments parks.
It was, exchange for that, the pond property.
Well, those are actually, I understand, sellable to any developer, so any development could buy those. It doesn't have to be in Patriot Point.
Correct.
Is my understanding. So we've waived, how much was that, John? We waived?
It was right here in front of me. It was $870,000. That would impact fee credits.
That's one of the things we need to be thinking about is how are we going to fund future parks? I would ask John. John and myself had the opportunity to visit each park in the city last week. John, would you like to give your assessment of our visit?
I would probably say that what I noticed in my experience was every park had places to improve, and as well as kind of a quaintness. So, in fact, I passed a few of those improvements on the parks, and those things were fixed. But it was, in general, it was, you could see where there'd been investments, like in the restrooms or playgrounds or things. And then you can see where the parks have been stretched thin, or where those things needed to be updated and improved. There were areas that, the turf was in fantastic shape. And there were other areas where the turf, not for lack of care, but just, was brown. But it's, there again, it's one of those things that just, you can tell that we've got a wide variety of parks, and that there's a wide variety of opportunities for our residents, and a good chance for people to get outside.
I've frankly never seen so many retention basin parks in my life, I guess. Seems like all of our parks were secondary to detention basins in the city. But one of the things that I mentioned to John, and I don't think I was out of line in that, is, and Tiffany mentioned this in her presentation, safety in the parks has got to be our number one priority. And I would say, John, we saw some things, I'm sure you passed on, that were significant safety issues for our residents that need to be at top priority. So, but it is a challenge, council, we need to be thinking about with the growth in our city. Frankly, I would like to see some decision made on Barker Park eventually. We've owned that ground for 20 years. I don't know how we would buy more ground and defer and not do that one. But I think we're going to be faced with those type of decisions. So any other questions from council? See if Councilman Swanson.
Tiffany, on the 41% statistic, does that include our undeveloped park
It does not.
acreage? It does
That
not,
includes current developed.
current developed. So if we develop Barker Park and the one up on
Lakeview.
Lakeview Park, that would add about 40 acres. So we have the ground for about half of the 80 that we need to have developed to build out. Is that correct?
Correct. to maintain that.
So we need to find another 40 acres or so and then do something with it.
Yes, I would like to add to the mayor's comment, that a lot of our parks are in detention basins. That's also something to consider as we move forward. That is one of the major headaches of the Parks Department, is that it's a detention basin first and a park second. Because if it needs to fill with water, it will. And we've seen that happen at Orton Park. And sometimes that's a benefit. You know, people can go kayaking, they can go paddleboarding for a little bit, but what they don't realize is that underneath all that water, the grass is still growing. And then when you cut it, it lays over on itself. We've actually, in the last couple of years, had to reseed the entire bottom of that basin because it is a basin first and a park second. So as we develop parks, I would like to discourage the sole use of detention basin / parks, especially for things like field where they have such special care and maintenance that's needed.
Yeah, I would say it's very difficult because those detention basins, as the water flows, we have these sinkholes that just kind of pop up. They're frankly dangerous. John and myself saw one. Well, John wasn't with me over there, but they just seem to appear with sinkholes. You know, the other, and I don't know the answer to this, but we do have some very unique parts of our parks. John and myself went down at Old Plum Park, down in the picnic area. And sometimes it's, I remember someone said, you know, it's easy to clean the corners because they're so visual, but it's really what happens underneath the kid's bed and what it kind of looks like. But I think somehow we need a plan to maintain those areas that are more natural scape, so to speak. And you know, I don't know how we do that, but I think there's definitely need. And I would say that a lot of these things we saw are high cost, they're kind of low cost items. And I think of some of these undeveloped areas. John volunteered, by the way, I want to point out, he said he was a painter and he would be happy to paint all the picnic tables down there at Old Lawn.
We might just take them up on that offer.
And, I think we better check the family first with the new addition, but just some of those things I think, and I don't know, I don't have the answers to them, but
Thank you for taking time to visit our park.
yeah, it was interesting there. So
We do have great parks.
other than in basins.
But the land was cheap, that's why they're in basins, right? Most of the ones in basins, we didn't have to pay for the land. It was, you know, you get free land to put a park in. And
What's that old saying? You get what you pay for?
And I actually noticed when we were in Orton Park, I didn't realize this, but a portion of that park was donated by a family in memory of someone. You know, and it's quite common in cities to get a lot of donated ground. a lot of bought for ground, but quite a bit of donated as well. It's,
In the early days when development was taking place, it seems like there were donations for parks and churches, and seems like that's kind of gone away. I don't know if that ought to be reinstigated. Which, by the way, I do want to say we do have good developers who live in our city and are very conscientious, and I do think they take pride in our city. That's not the case with everyone that's developing in our city.
No comment.
So anyway, just some thoughts there. I don't know what happened, Chief. Somebody ran through the fence down there at Orton Park. I don't know if
That was actually a tree.
that was a tree
So
that
we're
took
getting
that
to-
out, huh?
Yeah, we were getting to that, but the tree took out the fence. Couple trees.
Any other questions, Council, before we move on the agenda? Councilman Severing?
I don't have any questions or, any questions, but thank you for the presentation. I think because of a recent presentation to the city council, I was a little apprehensive about what citizens would be asking me about the parks. And that helped, this helped me just tremendously. I do, maybe recommendation. I love that replacement calendar. Is that on the website?
It's not. Would you like it to be?
I would, if I were, just looking on there and was curious about what was happening in the future with the park that was next to my subdivision, might be cool to know.
Absolutely.
So just a thought, please take that with a grain of salt, and you can do with it whatever you want, but I think that was just really a great presentation. Thank you, Tiffany.
The other interesting thing was that John pointed this out, where our park equipment is shaded by trees. Actually, some of our older equipment was in better shape than some of our newer equipment, just because the sun wasn't beating down on it all the time. So I think some of our older equipment actually was better shape. So, Councilmember Ekstrom?
I just had a suggestion too. I was thinking about that, the rotation schedule, so that residents could see that. Is there a way we could put like a maintenance request form on the website also? It's like if people are out and they can just go on and say, hey, I saw this. Maybe that might be a way. I mean, the Parks and Rec Department is really anxious to get things, but they can't be everywhere. They don't have eyes everywhere. But when residents see things and actually report it to them, then they're really quick. Tiffany was just telling me about one that somebody sent her an email that, there was like the gap under a chain link fence that was, how big was it? It was like,
It was 8 to 10 inches and it was up on the grandstand. So
yeah. And she got it, right out there immediately because somebody told her it was there.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea to get that, because the more eyes, the better. I would just add to that, that we would owe them a response on, what the result was of their comments.
So maybe even like a plaque somewhere that would be, if you see something on this park that needs assistance, please call.
Sure.
Maybe something like that.
We'll do
Yeah.
that.
Anywhere that it just increases the communication
Yeah.
between the user and the ones that are doing it. And then the other thing that I just wanted to point out, I don't know if you got the impact of this part of Tiffany's presentation, but she is losing trained people to other cities. She's training them here and then they're leaving for higher wages. So I think we need to,
But are they
Address
leaving to
that.
other cities, Tiffany, or are they just leaving for higher wages outside?
The last two were leaving just to higher wages outside, not necessarily other cities, but they wanted to be more.
So, yeah, we don't want to be a training ground, that's for sure.
so I think
Right,
that
Chief?
would be something.
Okay,
Training's expensive.
thank you.
Turnover is expensive.
Any other comments before we move on? All right, we will move on to item number 11. This discussion will be led by John Call, our city manager and attorney. This is in response to a commitment, I think you made, Councilman Swanson, that we would review the status of that new pond project. So, John?
yes, thanks, Mayor. I am confident this presentation will not be as thorough or answer as many questions as Tiffany's. I think I tried to move her to a different area of the agenda, so I didn't have to go right after her, but Council, this, as Mayor mentioned, this is in response to a request to just reevaluate this project. see where we're at, where we're going, and get some direction from the council. There's a few things that were kind of focused on the original goal of the project, which based on my understanding was at the time to take the existing basin on 2,700 or 2,600 or between 2,550. I started calling it the 2,550 basin because that's the one road that everyone agrees is called 20, the right name, right? That move that basin so it can be sold for commercial and relocate the stormwater someplace else. In that discussion, the council at the time, in working with the city engineer and others, found the location of the 6.5 acres on the Double Lot Ranch, which is just south and a little bit west of the current basin location. And then negotiations were entered into on the best way to acquire that property and what all the obligations of that entailed. As was mentioned, the city did not buy that property with cash. The city did it in what's called a dedication in lieu. That's an impact fee term that's used in the state code that basically says the city has to allow for it, a dedication in lieu. So it's kind of built along that ideology. But as the mayor mentioned, it is because it's a system improvement as opposed to a project improvement. That doesn't mean anything to the group, sorry. It's a citywide improvement as opposed to a development project improvement, if that makes sense. That's what helps it qualify for impact fees or that dedication in lieu. There were 2 agreements entered into, ultimately 3, including the development agreement with Patriot Point being the third one that wasn't analyzed as part of my staff report because the obligations for the infrastructure were tied into the first agreement with the Double Lot Ranch. In that agreement, there are a number of physical improvements that the city was required to do as part of the construction of a detention basin. And then the same thing to add the park facilities, the restrooms, and a road to it. So the 4 things that the city committed to in the agreement were to install storm drain lines, which take the water as it goes out of the basin and moves west. Install a sewer line to take to connect to the restrooms at the future park. And then to install a road to get residents to the park. And then the 4th one was a little unique with the storm drain lines as they exit the basin that's being proposed and go to 2,550. Because of elevation, the pipes would actually surface. And so there was a commitment to put road base on top of those so that the pipes didn't end up on top of the ground. That's to comply with stormwater standards and other things. There was also another agreement with Pineview Irrigation to facilitate the construction of this facility and to apply for a federal NCRS grant. I realize now I should have given you a better summary table, but as all of those agreements shuffle around, the basic non-reimbursable costs to the city, which doesn't include the land costs, is about $1.5 million. That's everything, including that pipe that was installed on the Montessori property, and then the city's participating contribution for the grant funding. And then the obligation for the remainder of the project, which the latest estimates put it at just over $10 million, were coming from NRCS, the federal grant program, and Pineview. So far to date, we've spent between Pineview and the city about $300,000 in engineering fees. Most of those have been reimbursed as part of the grant. The next step in the grant process is to do the finish out the environmental process, and hopefully get some feedback back from the federal grant writers on whether or not this project can move to phase 2, which is the design phase. Once the design phase is authorized, that's when the city would then be able to expend some funds with basically the guarantee of reimbursement. Let's see, any questions about what got us to that point? And then I'll kind of talk a little bit about kind of the future goals of the project, but I don't want to put everything in one if you have questions.
Okay, so John, the 1.48, the 1.486 million, 529,000 has already been spent, correct?
That's correct.
So that could be netted. What has to be expended still, correct? So,
Right, yeah.
John, I'm
Okay.
a little bit confused, because I think we reserved out the capital projects fund 900,000 just for the park, another 300,000 or 400,000 for the storm sewer. So I'm a little bit confused on the connection between the 986,000 or the 959,000 or whatever it is versus the amount we've set aside to extract from the capital projects fund.
So the discrepancy is in the estimates. The engineer's estimates are from about 2 years old. And as I went through the estimates to try and compare them to what the escrow agreements are for the Patriot Point agreement, this is going to sound a little weird, but the estimates for the cost of concrete, for example, are higher in the engineer's estimate than what the contractor is currently paying for the concrete right now, which seems weird. But understand that sometimes with federal projects, there are additional costs. And so we before we move further, we want a better updated number, obviously, and that'll be part of that next phase of the grant process. What we've submitted to the federal group is oh, sorry, I misspoke, Councilwoman Ekstrom. The what?
Isn't the pipe in addition to that?
Yeah, the pipe's in addition to the 1.46.
Okay.
So the 300,000 to 500,000 that the mayor's talking about is the storm drain component or the non-reimbursable, and then the 900,000 is roughly the 50-50 contribution that the city would make for park improvements. So yeah, thanks, Mayor. That's correct. As far as funding sources for this project, there's been some confusion going back to the very beginning of when this project was presented on what the property that is currently there can be sold for and who's entitled to that money. As Evan and Jamie and I have dug into it, we're confident that when this property was bought back in the 60s, it was actually paid for and it's a stormwater asset, which means the property sale proceeds should go to the stormwater fund. And that means that any of the stormwater components that are constructed or stormwater obligations can be paid for with those funds. But in general, we'd leave them as a stormwater asset. There's also a study that was done by Zions Bank. I think the council saw that study. I think that was soon enough that all of you were members of the council then. That basically identified that there would be roughly $15,000 a year in property taxes generated by this property that would be sold, and about $94,000 a year in sales tax if it was commercial. I only looked at the commercial part of their presentation because the council has indicated several times that's the commitment that they feel they made to the public. And so that's what we've left it at. Under the CDA area plan, there is an item listed on that plan to facilitate the relocation of that basin. That money is, like Evan mentioned earlier, it comes from the increase in property taxes from properties in the CDA as they increase in investment and value. And that roughly $1.7 million can be spent in any of the associated project costs, parks, stormwater, any of the obligations from the city. And there's also a separate line item of roughly $322,000 to fill in the existing basin to make it commercially viable. That's been one of the things the council has talked about in the past is how are we selling it? What are we selling? Are there any obligations? But that money is identified in the CDA project file as an ultimate expense. If the NCRS grant doesn't come through, there are provisions in the agreement with the Double Lot Ranch that again would, as I mentioned earlier, have some discussion about what happens if that doesn't happen. What are everyone's obligations? There's a phrase in the agreement that says essentially the city's not under an obligation to construct a basin. There's not a lot of details on exactly how the agreement would unwind at that point, or if it would unwind, but that's something that the council would have to look at that time. There's also the agreement with Pine View obviously anticipates that a basin will be constructed and there'll be an NCRS grant or NRCS grant. And so that provision in the case, and I'm more confident on this one, that if we don't get the grant, that agreement essentially goes away, or it's easier to unwind because you're dealing with two government entities. And all of our obligations are basically tied to the grant, meaning as we get money for engineering fees, we split the costs, or we share the costs, and we all are reimbursed equally. And then the same thing with construction costs, that they have the cost they're in charge of, and we have the cost we're in charge of. So if the NRCS grant doesn't come through, that one's a little bit easier to unwind. Although there still is obviously the opportunity for them to utilize the basin if we still continue with that portion of it. As I mentioned earlier, there's some questions with the Double Lot Ranch agreement that there might be some unwinding issues if the grant doesn't come through, and the council would probably at that time have to decide what the goal of the project or what the goal of the city is. The original project was anticipated and started without the grant funding available. It was meant to just be moving a detention basin. That was the original purpose. And then when the NRCS grant became available, because the city and Pineview had invested some money in the process, we were quite far along in the process, and we were able to get an application in about a week or two with a lot of work from our engineer at the time. And it ended up, so we were one of the first projects in the new grant because we were a little ways along. And I think that's, assuming the grant falls through, all the agreements unwind, the council is still going to be left with the same discussion about the basin property, and is it more value, or what's the plan with it? Obviously, it works as it is. It retains water. It does what the city needs it to. I believe over the weekend we had an individual bump our concrete outlet box, and it'll probably need some repair work, but in general, it functions as the city intends. And so there's no reason the city couldn't leave it there. The only question for the council would be do you want to consider looking at the economic impacts? I think if everything was in place with the CDA funds and everything, if we had the money now, it's an easy decision if everything unwound, because there's an upside to it. But in the flip side is with the city having to front a lot of expenses and get reimbursed later, then if the grant doesn't come through, then there's an obligation, or there's a commitment by the city to basically be making a loan to itself and getting paid back years or decades later. And I'm not a financial expert, so I'm not going to give you the net present value of all the investments and what it should be, but that ultimately is going to be the question for the council. I probably would hesitate to answer very specific legal questions about the Double Lot Ranch agreement. Just because if if the grant did fall apart and we ended up in an unwinding phase or ended up in a court setting, it's better to not have people interpreting the agreement in open meetings, because it locks us into positions that maybe a more clever contract attorney could argue opposite of. But I think that in general, there's some upside to the city in the current situation with the grant in place. There's some upside to the city if the grant fell through. There's also downsides in both of that. Right now, we're essentially obligated to another $1.5 million of expenses with the grant, with a potential future reimbursement, and without the grant, those expenses are higher. In the storm basin, for example, the actual detention basin, that grant has covered almost 100% of the costs. There's some that don't qualify. For example, the road base on top of the pipe, that type of stuff won't qualify. But in general, there's several obligations that would still, or there's several commitments the city would still have to do if we put the basin there, as far as making sure the facility functions the way it's supposed to. So that's a lot of numbers and information. Anything that you missed that I can do some more research on, or that you missed that I missed, and bring back additional information for you, or
Could you go through that one more time?
did I say ditto?
There you go. So John, we put the pipe to move the basin from where Maria Montessori was a basin, right? And then that pipe went over to where the Double Out Ranch basin's gonna be, correct?
Correct.
So then do we need to pipe it, if we decide to, move it, then it's gotta go to the current basin, the 2550 basin, right? Because
So-
it can't just fill up there.
So Dave might tell me I'm wrong, but the current pipe that's under the Montessori property is big enough that a certain portion of it would work as a detention or retention, meaning the water wouldn't leave, it just seep into the ground. So we could do some things to utilize it, and then the excess would backflow back to 2550. So it's downhill, but it's not so far downhill that there's not still some functionality to it. The engineers would prefer that we pipe it out. I did not grab that number, but it would be, I would be guessing, but I'll have to just email you the number, because otherwise I'll say it and it'll be wrong. But there would be an expense to run that pipe back out to 2550. So you're correct, Councilwoman Ekstrom.
Councilman Swanson?
John, given the potential legal entanglements, would it be appropriate to have a closed meeting discussion at some point over where we sit with this thing? And
If the council would like to.
where we could ask some specific questions and get some specific answers?
Sure.
That's what I'd like to do. I'd like to recommend council that we put this on for a closed meeting in our next council meeting, at the end of our next council meeting, so that we can I have some specific questions I'd like to ask, but don't want to put us in any kind of legal jeopardy in doing so.
Okay, we will add that to the agenda.
Thank you.
Any other questions for John regarding this issue? Okay. Let's move on then to item number 12 on our agenda. Councilmember Barker, do you have anything you'd like to report to us on the building and planning department?
Yes. We have a new planning director, Scott Hess.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me, letting me hang out.
I talked to him earlier and said we'd be here at least till 11, so we've got to take up another hour.
Well, I have my finance report here in a minute.
Okay,
so-
oh, yeah, that's true. And then the last thing, I spoke with Brandon, we are gonna have a work session the first week in June. Talking about Mountain Road, Skyline Drive, alignment stuff. So get ready for that.
Anything else you'd like to chat about?
Nope.
Okay. Well, Councilman Swanson, I believe as part of your report, result of our recent audit, we're required to have a monthly review of the financial position of the city. So I'm assuming that's part of your report. Do you have anything else to report to us this evening?
I don't, other than we'll take a look at where we are with the sales tax collections. Here today, we continue the trend of being inexplicably higher than we were last year. That's the best description I can come up with, given the rather interesting year that we had with COVID. I agree with Mayor. It'd be interesting to see what our March numbers look like and where they come in, if we maintain this trend of staying above, or if we start to see a leveling out or even a decrease. Excuse me. Our prior year-to-date collections were $2,074,000. We had projected to collect this year $2,019,000. Our actual collections are $2,435,092. So we're not quite, as far as numbers reported, we're not 75% of the way through the year, but we're at roughly 79% of our expected tax collection. Excuse me, just got a tickle in my throat. So, thank you very much. We're seeing year-to-date variance from prior year, 17%. Variance from budget, we're looking at almost 21%. Again, it's interesting that the league is predicting a 3.5% increase for next year. What actually happens, I think, Mayor, is anybody's guess. The best prognosticators out there, economically speaking, are kind of hemming and hawing all over the place as to what's going to happen. And it can vary greatly by community, as we saw in the numbers that Evan, where'd you go, Evan? There you are. Evan gave us of the predictions of various cities throughout the state. So we have projected there, if you look at the sales tax trend at the bottom, a slight decrease as we finish out the year and continue on, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Any questions, council? If any of you come up with the magic 8-ball that can tell us where we're going to go next year, let's quick write the book, publish it, get rich, and then we'll plan our budget. All I have then.
Anything on how we're doing expenditure wise?
I'm sorry, I don't have that prepared for tonight.
Okay. Probably, yeah, but maybe in the future you could kind of give us that
Absolutely.
assessment to the council council where we're at expenditure wise. A little bit over.
It's in there. I just didn't prepare
Okay.
to present it. It's there.
I know Evan said that he cut the presentation down from it used to be 70 pages to 17. So,
Right.
hey, thank you, Councilman Swanson, for that report. Anything else? All right, we'll move on to item number 13. Katie, if you would watch on Zoom, and then any public comments here. See if anyone would like to make public comments.
Brenda Ashdown, I live in North Ogden. You know, if I'm here, I'm probably gonna say something. I want to thank Tiffany. I thought that presentation was very interesting, very informative, things that I had no clue of. A couple of concerns I have. One is more than once tonight, I've heard a comment of, I will ask you offline or I will email you. And that concerns me because if I'm sitting at this meeting, I want to hear what's going on and I don't want it done behind the scenes. I somewhat understand the closed meeting, but I still think as much of that needs to be transparent as possible. I have some huge concerns and issues with this fishing, kayaking pond, whatever it is. We were told that the sale of the old pond, 1.6 million, would go down and pay for the new one. We've already put the pipes in. Now we're gonna do the architecture or planning or whatever it is. We have to pay for all of this in the hopes that we're gonna get this grant back, but we don't know if we're gonna get this grant back. We were, at the first discussion of this, we were basically told that this was all guaranteed. I'm a little concerned about that. I feel like the process is maybe a little bit backwards. And what if we sell this detention pond and we don't get the grant and we need the other one? The city's gonna have to come up with the money to pay for that, whether we put in a park with it or not. I don't know all of your background of why it was done like it was, but to me, it seems a little bit backwards. Thank you.
Kate, do you have comments off of Zoom tonight?
We do. Susan Kilborn would like to make a comment.
Hey, Susan, go ahead.
Hi, y'all. Can you hear me?
You can.
Okay, just checking to make sure. I have important stuff to share. First of all, I want to tell you, I really, really love my mayor and city council. And in the interest of public safety and their healthful well-being, I want to make a recommendation that they build into their agenda a 15-minute break somewhere so they can take care of whatever it is they need to take care of. Because I don't know about you guys, but I couldn't sit there for 4 hours and not hit the potty. So that's my first thing, and quit laughing. Second thing I would like to address to the Parks and Recreation Department. I have a couple of questions. Has anyone ever done a study on the attendance to the parks in our city? Is there one or several particular parks that have more attendance than others? And if we have a fixed budget on how much we can expend on improvements and reparations, the city council might be able to make a better recommendation on where those funds are allocated if they knew and could take into consideration, do we want to beef up the parks and facilities that have more public participation, or do they want to spend money on reparations and making improvements on other ones that are not? Also, I think that maybe something else that could be looked into is we have a lot of citizens out here who need to get off their fat butts and maybe do some getting out into nature and helping out with the parks and recreation. And let's pump up the jam. I'll make cookies if we all can rally and somebody organize, let's go to a park this week. And then in a couple weeks, go to a park that week. Just recommendations, but I seriously want you all to go to the bathroom, please. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Susan. It must be, it must be. Do you have anybody else?
This is fine. Thank you for the bladder consideration.
Okay. Looks like we move on to agenda number 14. Council, mayor, and staff comments. Council, anything you've heard from citizens we need to be aware of?
I had a citizen contact me this week about looking down through like the hollow. He was concerned about, he'd been down there, there's a lot of dead trees down there. And he was just thinking that if the water came through.
Not this year,
What's that?
not this year.
No, it's not gonna happen this year, but I just took the opportunity to go down there today. And there is a lot of dead fall down in there that when, and if we have a heavy rain sooner or later, it could really back up. So it might be something to just look on for an agenda. Something to be looked at in the future maybe, Dave. There's some big trees that are down there, and then, some safety around the amphitheater, and the hollow drops down quite a bit. There's some spots down there where there's probably, I'm about 6'4", so, they're probably talking about 10, 15 feet of drop. So somewhere down the line, maybe look at those issues. So.
Like I thought attorney math was bad, real estate math is even worse. That shrunk quite a bit.
Happens as you age.
Anything else? Councilman Swanson.
I have two things. One is a suggestion that I think I'd like to discuss relatively soon. We, in the past, when Mayor Taylor was our mayor and we got exceptionally busy, Cheryl, you'll remember these days, we had an option of continuing to have meetings that went till 10, 11 o'clock at night, or to meet every Tuesday night and have a reasonable cutoff time.
They were never reasonable.
Well, it was better than it would have been if we hadn't had more meetings. I really think that it will help us to stay on task and to be more succinct as I ramble on. If we had weekly meetings, the first 4 Tuesdays of the month, and we set a 9 o'clock deadline. Last item on the agenda to begin at 8:30. They give us a half hour and then we're done by 9.
That never worked.
It didn't work before because we didn't make it work.
We can have that discussion.
I think we can have that discussion.
John, we want to put that on the upcoming agendas, please?
Yep. Just one that has 16 or 17 items on it. And put it at the very end so we can have a lengthy discussion. Please. The other question that I have is for the proposed citizen-led parade. How will the police be utilized? And how would that be paid for? The time that the overtime and the officers, how would that be paid for? Is that expected to be a donation? Do we set ourselves up as a precedence that when a citizen group puts together a parade that we donate to police? The same with park usage. If they wanted to rent out the Boweries, will that be donated or is that going to be expected to be paid for? I think that's a discussion we need to have before plans get too far down the road.
Maybe 11 o'clock wasn't too far off.
Well, I don't think we have that discussion tonight, but I think on an item agenda night where we could have 22 or 23 items.
Let me just ask the chief, What do we do to help out like the high schools when they have their parade or other parades that we've had? I know we've had, you know, leading citizens out of town and well, what's our process? Do we charge people for that or how does that work?
We know, when you're talking scale, though, the Cherry Days parade, the next biggest parade or escorting would be the homecoming parade for Weaver High. And it's so it's minimal, we can handle that with a car or two at the back and a car or two at the beginning. And control traffic as without having a personnel at every intersection, other than maybe at 3100, 450. Or there's a traffic light.
I think at staff meeting this morning, you said we had to call in additional officers because we have to have barricades at each. Apparently, we have some citizens who just drive out into the road and get in the parade if we don't have those barricades.
Yeah. Well, Cherry Days, that's a grand scale. It takes every staff member we have, both sworn and most of our civilian, and an additional 20, up to 20 plus volunteers to cover the parade route to ensure that traffic doesn't have any.
So are we saying we would provide the same we do to 2 cars up front, 2 cars at back? And I think I heard Mr. Miller say that he's got the sheriff's office lined up to provide public safety, if I heard him right.
Well, I'm not sure we could have that discussion.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what he indicated, right?
I know he had talked to them. I'm not sure what their arrangement is. But they come and assist us. So on top of what I already named, we also have 3 or 4 from the sheriff's office, usually 3 or 4 from Ogden City,
Right.
Riverdale, I
think the response is, Councilman Swanson, is that they need to get a permit from the city, right? And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, John, that has to be approved by the chief. So the chief is going to tell them what kind of public safety they need. And I guess the discussion has to take place from that.
There's two permits required, Mayor. One would be the event permit through Park and Rec. The other would be a UDOT permit to shut down Washington, which would probably need to be started pretty quickly.
My point is that my recollection is if the event is large enough, you make the decision on what kind of public safety protection needs to be there, whether it needs to be police or whatever, is my understanding.
It's typically something that I have to sign off on.
Right.
With the participation of 500 or more. But usually those have all been isolated to a park and not much of a concern.
This is different beast, for sure.
It would definitely take probably all of our resources.
Well, I think they have to rent the barricades and everything, don't they?
Well, I think that's some of the questions that need to be asked as this, I think, laudable idea of a citizen-led parade. It's not a matter of just saying, hey, let's get together and we'll have some floats. There's a significant amount of planning that goes on behind the scenes in order for it to be done safely. And somebody has to foot the bill for that. When the city sponsors it, we foot the bill because we're sponsoring it. And other departments lend some of their officers to us, the motor officers and others. I think those questions, we need to have answers to those questions if we're going to permit a parade to be going down the street.
And we have a fixed rate for providing public safety for outside events. So it takes that burden off of the taxpayers, is $55 an hour per body.
My point is, and it's going to take a lot more, as the chief has said, regarding putting on a Weaver High parade versus putting on a major parade. But I would say that we offer the same resources we offer to a to a high school parade, and the rest is we're going to have to determine what they're going to do, because Otherwise, we're kind of not being consistent in our application of what we're willing to provide. So,
And that, timing is kind of, we're running short, so as much notice as we can have, what we need to do with our resources would be. We appreciate that. So I know Mr. Miller, I told him I would reach out to him. A discussion with him tomorrow, so.
well, it's probably good to have the discussion so there's no surprises. Thank you. Anything else, Councilman Swanson?
That's all I have.
Good question. Thank you. Councilman Barker?
Yeah, I've got a recommendation or a question for Tiffany. Can we water our parks less?
Yes.
I would hope we would follow the state's guidelines of whatever they're. That also help with mowing.
It does bring up a discussion that we wanted to have with the city council as well, because we did see what was issued by Governor Cox. But it comes down to a level of service question, because we can water less and then we'll get complaints about the way that the water, the care of the parks look. Or we can water, our regular watering schedule, and we can have complaints that we're doing that as well. So as long as the council is aware, we can meet whatever level of service you'd like to have in either direction.
This is just my recommendation, water the fields to keep them green so the kids aren't playing in dirt and the hillsides can go brown. And I will field all the complaints. Because we're following the states and we are in a drought. I was talking with Dave earlier, he said the water department's already at August levels for pumping. So the creek by my house has no water in it. And usually it's gushing, so that's why I say the hollow's not getting overflow this year.
No.
I think we really need to be watering less, but that's just one point.
No, we did have that discussion. I think I asked Tiffany the question, would we get more complaints watering or more complaints with brown? I think she was gonna flip a coin, determine what the answer was, because we'll get comments either way. But I think the residents do look at us and say, we are in a drought, we know what at least we have a basis for doing it, so. Council, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we're really low on water. I think it's time to. I think Ryan is right. It's like, don't have the kids playing in mud, but in dirt, but the hillsides and things that makes me sad. As long as it doesn't kill the grass, it just goes dormant. Yeah, it sure goes into my bed. I can't keep it out.
Any objections to that, council?
My only concern is that we don't kill it off.
And we surely need to make an effort to let the citizens know that we are complying and my grass might be a little bit browner.
And we would expect them also to comply, the residents, not just the city.
All of our lawns are going to be looking a little.
All right. Any other comments from council? I did have one comment that I've got, well, two comments. I don't know how many of the council saw this, but I guess we have a strip of ground, an easement, John. That's the city took on. It's like 18 by, Dave, the resident said they talked to you about it. They said it's full of sticker weeds and punctures and it's city property, and they're wondering why we're requiring citizens to maintain their yards, but the city's not following the same thing. Where is that location again? John's acting like he's puzzled here.
No, it's right on 1700 North. It goes between several homes on the west side of Washington, and it goes back to a wetland area where there's a trail. I think staff, Dave and Tiffany, we would love to have it be asphalted or maintained by either of the neighbors. The trouble is we can't transfer ownership. It's technically city property because we need to be able to get a traco on that piece of property to the back to clean out the wetlands if we ever run into an issue there and we have to pull stuff out of the wetlands back there.
why don't we look at what it would cost to asphalt? But it just seems like to me, if that's the easiest way to maintain the property. Because once again, I just believe that if we don't set the example, why can we expect, we put code enforcement officer at a disadvantage. She's out trying to enforce the code and let's throw it back on her face and say, well, why don't you guys practice it yourselves? So,
I get a cost estimate for that.
yeah. Or gravel or something, but then, speaking of parks, I'm sure Tiffany's heard this a million times, but still get the question about pickleball courts in our city. We talked about even converting one of the tennis courts to pickleball, but it just doesn't seem to work. So anyway, any comments from staff?
Just one. It's that,
How long will this comment be? It's
20
like if you're in
seconds.
California, you don't ask how far it is, it's how long it takes to get there.
20 seconds. The email you got from Dave Gordon about the retaining wall that's mentioned earlier, Lauren and I and Dave are talking to him, and we'll get an answer and get back to you on that. So.
Okay.
That was 13.
Good timing. Tiffany.
Mayor, I just have some answers for resident Susan Kilborn for a couple of her questions. No, we have not done a parks attendance survey, but our observations do show that our most attended parks are the ones that have the most amenities and activities, so our fields, our courts, and skate park, things like that.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. Councilmember Stoker, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Would you like to make that motion?
Absolutely. Are we done yet?
All right, we have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a second. Lisa didn't die for a lack of a second. Okay, the motion's-
Move my second.
All right, all in favor of adjourning? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye.